Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. I am super excited for today's guest because I have had a literacy crush on him for a very long time. And I can't wait to talk more with him today. Melissa, well, I know you know him a little bit, so.
My like thing right now is Fluency in Baltimore City. That's all I talk about. People are like, yes, Melissa, we get it. Fluency. So for me, talking to Tim Rasinski is huge because I think when people think of Fluency, they think of Tim Rasinski. So I'm really excited.
I agree. And Tim doesn't know it, but he changed the course of my career when I read his Why Fluency is Hot article a long time ago. So we are super excited. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lori and Melissa. I'm glad to be here. I was wondering why my ears have been burning the last month or so, Melissa. All that Fluency work you've done in the Baltimore schools. It's really good stuff. I had a chance to take a look at it. And it's really neat to see creative teachers doing things that are not only engaging for kids, but really make a difference in kids' lives. So, yeah, well done.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Well, and I know that, so I'm just going to do a quick rundown, Melissa, because I know that if you don't know everything about Tim, he's the professor of literacy education at Kent State University. Tim, are you still the director of the reading clinic there?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. We run the reading clinic in the summertime. And of course, last summer with the pandemic, things kind of got discombobulated. So I think if anything, I'm still the honorary director.
Got it. Okay. That's good. Yeah. And I know you're going to talk a bit about some of the things that you've done, but you've got lots of books and other things that you put out. And I don't want to give too much away because we're going to talk about the specific things that will help with fluency and lots of other topics we're going to talk about. So
that's great.
Cool.
Yeah. Before we jump in, Tim, I'm wondering, how did Fluency become your thing? How did you get to this point of being the Fluency superhero?
Well, first of all, I'm not the superhero, but it's an old story, actually, for me. It's actually when I was a reading interventionist outside of Omaha, Nebraska, over 40 years ago. And I'd been a classroom teacher and then was working on my master's degree. And so I thought, well, okay, work with struggling readers, become an interventionist. So I'm working with these kids who are having difficulty in reading, and I'm doing everything the book says. I'm working on phonics, working on vocabulary, comprehension, and many of the kids were making good progress, but still there were some who were just, no matter what I did, they were flatlining, you might say, were not making much progress despite my best efforts. And fortunately for me, I was working on my master's degree at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And I still remember the profs had us reading some of these articles that were beginning to appear on reading fluency. One was called Fluency, the Neglected Goal of the Reading Program, Dick Ellington. Another one was called The Method of Repeated Readings by Dr. J. Samuels. And of course, this great one by Carol Chomsky, After Decoding What? After you're working with kids and you teach them decoding, and they're still not making any progress, then what? And of course, her answer was reading fluency. So I read these and I thought to myself, yeah, there's something to this. And so I tried some of these methods that Dr. Samuels, Dick Ellington were talking about. And lo and behold, some of these kids began to take off. And in some cases, it was breathtaking, the progress they were making. And it wasn't just their reading, it was their confidence. They started to say, yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
I just have to do, maybe read a text more than once, and maybe read it with another person who's perhaps a slightly better or more fluent reader than I am. But it was really quite amazing, and it was a real eye-opener. So I got on that horse 40 odd years ago, and I'm still on it. So it hasn't done me yet. So I do think it is something that can be a game changer for many kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully the work that Baltimore is doing will be able to show that in the future, the near future. So I'm curious about, I mentioned it earlier, the Why Fluency Should Be Hot. That article changed my life. And I remember reading it in a teacher professional development and then just over and over and over again, and really trying to get my hands on everything else that you had written about fluency. So I'm wondering
can I give you a little background to that article?
Yes, so I wanted you to tell me all about it and everything that we would need to know about why it should be hot.
For years, the International Literacy Association, I guess back then it was the International Reading Association, would do this survey. They would ask 50, 60 experts, what are the hot topics in reading? And for every single year, when they asked about reading fluency, the consensus answer was, it's not hot. It's not a hot topic. And not only is it not hot, it shouldn't be hot. And of course, well, being a person who's kind of invested in fluency, that kind of pissed me off. So, sorry about that. Hopefully you'll edit that one out. But I said, well, let's write an article why it should be hot. And so that was the genesis for that article, is in response to so many experts who were saying it's not hot. And I think there's a reason for that, why the reason they were saying that, but still I thought I needed to have to try to respond to that in some way. So I'm glad I'm at least influenced one person, Lori.
Just one. I mean, lots of them. But that's so interesting because it is one of the 5 pillars. Yeah. And you would think at some point it should be hot, right?
Yeah. Well,
hot topic.
Yeah. I think part of it has been just the way it's been thought of. First of all, it has that 2 dimensions to it. It's automaticity and word recognition, but it's also prosody or expressiveness. And so one of the things is that you focus on one at the expense of the other. I think that's happened. In fact, what's often happened with the automaticity component is that has somehow morphed into making kids read fast. We measure automaticity by speed of reading. And so, okay, well, we'll improve reading by getting kids to read faster. And of course, that doesn't work at all. We end up with as fast readers, but not very good readers. Then we often associate it with oral reading. To read fluently, you have to read orally, but the way we read orally also reflects how we read silently. So there's a connection there. But again, the thought was, well, we're not too concerned about oral reading come 4th or 5th grade. So let's just put that off to the side. And then another part was just that the idea that it was just for younger kids, primary grade kids. And it certainly is, absolutely. Jean Chaul puts it, I think, in around grade 2 and 3 in her model of reading. But kids are not fluent at the end of grade 3. The fluency just doesn't go away. It actually becomes an albatross for many kids, and so it's something that even goes well beyond the primary grades. So I think for those reasons, it kind of got pushed off to the side, and of course all this emphasis on phonics, sort of kind of drowned out all the conversation about everything else. And I think that's a bit unfortunate because fluency is, well, a bridge, if you will, a link between word recognition and comprehension at the other side. And most kids develop that bridge on their own, but if they don't, then we've got to help them. We got to do something to help those kids develop that fluency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling you all before that when I was a younger teacher, I always taught middle school and high school. So this was middle school. But I was in a reading specialist program. And so I wanted to try things out. And I was all in on fluency and I did the timed reading. And then all of a sudden I had 20 8th graders who were just speed reading. And I was just like, this is a mess. This is not what I wanted to happen. And I did what you just said, which was like, well, then forget it because this is just a mess.
Right. And I have no qualm against teachers who work on this. They're well-meaning. They want, but it's our job, as people who work in professional development to help teachers understand what this is. I do want kids to become fast readers. There's no question about it, but I want them to become fast the way all of us have, who are part of this podcast got to be fast readers. What do we do? We read a lot. Nobody told me to read fast. We just developed that automatic word recognition, and speech is a consequence of that. It's not a cause. So we really want to avoid that. But I can relate to that myself, Melissa. I've seen many good teachers do that, and no fault of their own.
Good intentions.
Yeah.
Good intentions. Exactly.
I feel like we should have a fluency confessional based on what we've shared with you previously. I mean, it's a lot. I did it too, and I remember being delivered timers to my classroom, like, because everybody got timers to work on Fluency. And then I know I shared this with you all before, but it makes me laugh, so I'll say it again. But when I taught second grade, like in I don't know, the teacher found this as a resource and shared it with everyone, and everyone's like, wow, this is such a great way to teach fluency. And you're like literally reading a number line or an alphabet strip that is interspersed with different punctuation, marks of punctuation. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And, basically not challenging at all, which kind of flips fluency on its head. And, the way that's why I think your article was so impactful, because I stopped doing that after I read it. But, I'm curious if you might want to uplift, Tim, what kinds of texts should or can teachers use that are effective in teaching fluency?
If I may, I will say this in response to our earlier conversation. In our reading clinic, we do test kids, and we do the 1 minute read, the doubles, Ames, Webb, and so on. It's a good measure. It really is. But the thing is, it's not a method of instruction. So when we give kids a passage to read, we say, I want your best reading, not your fastest, your very best reading. And that is enough for a cue for many kids.
Yeah, because we read different texts different ways.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Sometimes you just want to, mull over a text, perhaps an interesting word that you come across or an interesting idea that is posed to. But as far as texts go, pretty much any text can lend itself to fluency. But in particular, I've kind of focused on some kinds of texts we don't use too much in school anymore. If you think about fluency, often associated with oral reading, are there texts that are meant to be read orally? And of course, poetry, scripts, as in Reader's Theater scripts, speeches from American history or from history itself. It could be monologues, dialogues, jokes, perhaps, songs. Oh, we do a lot of work with songs with our kids, but these are texts that are meant to be read out loud, and they're meant to be read with expression. So when kids rehearse them, that's what they should be focusing on, not just trying to read it fast, but to raise my voice, lower my voice, have a dramatic pause here, because in doing so, what you're actually doing is you're reflecting the meaning of the text. If you have a listener listening to you read, they're more able to understand what it is you're reading by your expressiveness, your oral expressiveness. So there's your connection and comprehension right there. To read something with fluency, with expression, you have to really have some degree of understanding of the text that you are reading. And the other thing about these kinds of texts, and especially poetry, is they're not terribly long texts. And if you're working with younger kids, and if you're working with kids who struggle, sometimes they can be overwhelmed by a text that, is 10, 20, 30 pages long. Oh, I can't handle this. But, they can handle a 10-line poem, perhaps, or even something a little bit longer. And not only that, the rhythm, the rhyme, the melody, all those things make it a poem, or for that matter, a song, easy to learn. How many of us as adults remember poems that we learned as kids, in school? There's something about the nature of these texts that make them very memorable. I often tell the story about my wife and I, up until the pandemic, had gone to not work, but we would volunteer at a local Alzheimer's memory unit. And we would go there once a week and just sit around and chat with these folks. And it was kind of interesting because these folks would not remember us from one week to the next, as you might expect.
Oh, yeah.
What would happen is, before we would leave, we would have a little sing-along, get everybody together, and we do a little sing-along, all those old-fashioned songs, And what I find so amazing is, as I said, these folks don't remember us, but they would remember the songs, even if we brought in a new one. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. And if you think about that, what's a sight word in reading? A sight word is nothing more than a memorized word. Well, I say put those words to rhythm, to rhyme, to melody. You're going to remember forever. Even dementia is going to have a hard time erasing them from your memory. But sometimes it's interesting how we come to those insights.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
that's true. So my daughter could not remember my phone number for for the life of us. I mean, we were really having a hard time. And once I put it to, I think I don't even know. I'm not going to sing my phone number so everybody can call me, but I put it to like a little nursery rhyme song. And it's now, I mean, now even, you know, if someone asks my phone number, I can see her pause and I know she's singing it for just a second until but it's true. Music, you know, putting stuff to music is really powerful. But even what you said about those, you know, the short clips and helping to, and reinforce that fluency, I'm thinking about, and Melissa, I know you have a grade 8 example that you want to share too, from Wit and Wisdom, just because it came up, but I'm thinking about in grade 5 that in Wit and Wisdom, students engage in a whole wordplay module, and they read and watch Abbott and Costello, who's on first.
Oh yeah.
And as they are working with it, after, you know, engaging with it, they are so engaged in it, so funny. And I mean, often, you know, you go back later in the year and they still can talk about it and remember it. And just, I mean, think about how that's something as small as that is helping to build their fluency in that moment, because they do understand the purpose of it too, right? They're doing it and they understand that it's supposed to be funny and how they should say it and act it. And
but isn't it interesting? It's those memorable moments like those are the ones that we remember from our school, when we have that chance to be performers, have a chance to be creative with our voices. And I think we need to try to get more of those into our school, into our classrooms. One of the things I mentioned also about text is the difficulty level. You know, we've been having this argument about what's the appropriate level for reading. And I think there's a growing body of evidence that supports having kids read more challenging material. You know, Steve Stahl did a study back in the 20 or so years ago, 15 years ago, in Georgia with second graders with repeated readings. Now, many of the listeners know that repeated readings, having a kid read a text more than once, is a great fluency builder. But what Steve found was when the kids made the greatest progress when the material they were asked to read repeatedly was at their frustration level, was at a level that we probably would not normally recommend for them. And yet here they are practicing it. And I think it was the idea of practice and support that allowed them to handle a more challenging piece. And in doing so, you know, they were able to accelerate their progress in reading. So this whole notion of fluency is beginning to challenge our notion of what's the appropriate text for kids. There, in our reading clinic, we give kids, I like to say, interest trumps difficulty. We give kids easy stuff sometimes. We give them, you know, stuff right at their level, but we also challenge them too, if they're more interested in that kind of material. Can you imagine a fifth grader reading the cremation of Sam McGee? There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee. And it goes on and on and on. But I mean, talk about a fifth grader. Cremation is a great topic for them.
Yeah.
But it's really neat to see kids, you know, just not only the joy and the confidence that comes when they say, I can learn something, I can read something as well as anybody. And that's really what we want kids to be at that level, where they can be successful and know it.
I was telling you all about the example from Wit and Wisdom that I always find is like such a great example, especially for older students. In the 8th grade first module, they read a book that's a book of poetry, but then they also write their own poetry and they have to perform it. And so throughout the whole module for a quarter, they're like writing their own poems, reading their own poems to each other over and over and practicing with the poems that are in the novel. And it's just like, there's such a purpose to it, but they get to be creative and
right.
Really powerful to see. It doesn't feel like, you know, they're doing fluency as something separate. Exactly. It feels like it's part of it.
And it's so neat at the end of the week when, you know, the teacher can dim the lights in the classroom and pull down the shades. You know, the class is a poetry slam or a reading theater festival. They all performing what they had been. So they actually have a purpose now to engage in that repeated reading.
Yeah.
that rehearsal. It's the performance on Friday.
I've been doing that during COVID with my daughter, and she's been doing fluency work with grade level text. And I don't know if you can see it behind me. See that big podcast microphone?
Yeah. Okay.
I let her read into that or use this headset. And I mean, you would think that I gave her $1 million. I mean, she's so pumped to, and I mean, but it's true. Like, kids just love the simple things, and it's the little stuff that can get them motivated. And like you said, like that Friday, Fluency Friday, that's an amazing way to build fluency practice in.
Making it authentic, making it like something, we as adults do. One of my favorite quotes is from John Dewey, who said something to the effect that we should make our classrooms, I think he used the word embryonic, classroom communities. In other words, they should reflect what happens in real life.
Yeah.
And if you're a TV or radio broadcaster, you'd be using a microphone like the one you have behind you, Lorraine. So why not bring that kind of stuff in? Just make it real for kids.
Yeah.
It's when we make things artificial that they don't see the purpose in it.
Yeah.
And, are just not terribly engaged. And of course, that's true for teachers too. When we ask teachers to do those kinds of things as well, things that are highly scripted instruction. Kind of getting off. I'm getting on my soapbox.
That's okay. I do have a question for you about, I work with secondary schools. So I'm wondering, when we look at our standards, fluency is not there. And so I think, there's a general assumption like that's not a problem for us, right? We don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, but I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to
No, for sure.
Fluency for older students.
Well, pump up Melissa's tires right now is what she needs.
Well, in an ideal world, fluency shouldn't be a problem. But for secondary, kids should develop their fluency, by the end of 5th grade or so in my ideal world, but we don't live in an ideal world.
Right.
We have a lot of kids, especially those kids we worry the most about. Fluency is the issue. We did a study a few years ago in one of our urban schools in our neck of the woods, Canton, Ohio. And we were working with 9th graders, and we just had them read a passage. It was about the Wright brothers, if I'm not mistaken. But what we did was we did the 1 minute read, or we took their first minute of reading, and we found that over half these students were well below what would have been 8th grade norms. We didn't even have 9th grade norms to look at. So we had looked at 8th grade norms, and over half of them were significantly below that.
Yeah, that's what we're finding too.
Yeah. And so, and what do we do about it? Aside from, you, Melissa, we have great secondary teachers, but most of them don't have that training or that knowledge in reading fluency. So what do? Well, let's work on comprehension. Let's build vocabulary, which is great. But if you never work on fluency, how do you ever expect kids to develop it in that area? We did another study a couple of years ago. I did this with college students, and same thing. We had college. I think these were college sophomores, and we had them read a passage. It was a 12th grade passage, and then we correlated it with the students' ACT scores. So their college. So first of all, these are probably pretty good readers to begin with. But what we found was that you could actually predict ACT performance by 1 minute of reading. Wow. 1 minute of reading, those kids who were more automatic, reflected in a speedier read, they were tended to have higher scores on the ACT reading section, which of course that's a silent reading comprehension score. Oral reading fluency predicts silent reading comprehension even into college. So it's something that we can't neglect. And so whenever I get a chance like this to be interviewed by great professionals like you guys, I jump on it. So thank you.
Yeah.
The one thing I always talk about is the amount of energy that students need, right? So that if they're still putting energy into the figuring out what each word is, they don't have the energy to make any meaning of what they're reading. Right.
That I use that often myself. I think it was Jay Samuels actually talked about. He says that we have a finite amount of, he called it attention, I believe, but I would call it cognitive resources or whatever. And if we have to use too much of those resources for word decoding, figuring out what the words mean, we don't have that left over, that we've lost that, and it can no longer be applied to comprehension. And, we see these kids all the time when they read. They're slow, full of effort, letter by letter, sound by sound. So I say, God bless these kids for working so hard, but they're putting all their effort in the wrong area. We want them to be automatic like us. I mean, something I teach a course here in phonics, and one of the first things I tell my students is the goal of phonics instruction is to get kids not to use phonics. If you have to use phonics when you're reading, you're in big trouble because you're stopping at every third and fourth word, sounding it out. And yeah, you can do it, but there's a price to be paid. And of course, we know what it is. It's comprehension. You don't understand something when you're just kind of word by word through a text there. You kind of jogged my memory here. One of the analogies I often use is learning how to drive a car. When we first learned to drive a car, all our attention had to be devoted to the steering wheel and the gas pedal and the gear shift. And if the radio was turned on, you had to turn it off because that was distracting you. But with a little bit of practice, not only did we become accurate in our driving, we could quit hitting the mailbox and running over the curb. We also became automatic in our driving. And the evidence of that is, have you ever driven someplace and not know how you got there? Your mind was wandering. It was another place. So now we can read, when we drive a car, we can multitask. We can drive safely and accurately and still listen to the radio. Some states, I don't know if it's true in Maryland, but you can talk on the phone. You can converse with the passenger. You can multitask. And in reading, it's the same thing. Reading is a multitask activity. You have to figure out the words. But if you can do that automatically, you can do that other task, which is pay attention to meaning, create meaning.
Yeah. So, I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah. And how did we get that way? You drive a lot, right? You practice it a lot. And, you might drive your parents' car for a while. And interestingly enough, once you get automatic on that car, that knowledge transfers to other automobiles. And it's the same thing in reading. Once you get automatic on one passage, there's a degree of transfer to other passages as well.
Yeah. It's like I think you made a good point. I don't know if it was on this call or the pre-call, because I feel like I've talked to you a couple times this week. Once you construct these skills, you then don't have to, you're never deconstructing them. So, right, like you don't want to use phonics anymore to break it down. I don't want to be like, trying to figure out what I'm doing as I'm driving, like click up to use the wipers. Right. And I'm trying to use it fluidly rather than deconstruct.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good word, fluently. Yeah. It's just done without really conscious thought or minimal conscious thought about doing it. So you can keep your eye on the road.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, I feel like fluency, putting aside, I guess other conversations that we could have just for the moment around phonics and decoding and that cognitive load, fluency does seem like the lowest hanging fruit in like the 5 reading pillars. Yet I do believe, because of what I've seen in classrooms, that it is usually the first thing to get pushed aside. Well, we don't have time for this, or, they'll do that for homework versus, prioritizing when I'm giving an example, right? When students come into the class versus doing a journal entry that doesn't relate to anything, how was your weekend or whatever, instead of using instead of using that time to build fluency, right? So, and again, if a teacher is listening and they're asking their students what they did over the weekend, I'm not criticizing, I'm just giving a specific example. So why is it, in your opinion, do you think that fluency is the first thing to kind of get pushed to the side instead of elevated to the top as hey, this is like a low hanging fruit that we can definitely get really good at very quickly?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think part of it has been this misunderstanding about what constitutes fluency. The reading fast, teachers get to the point where they begin to rebel against that and say, okay, this making kids read fast isn't working. So they just give it up, and say, let's move on, do something else. Or so some degree of that. And it does require perhaps a different way of thinking about reading instruction. You're not necessarily getting kids into, doing worksheets on phonics. You're not engaging them all the time on comprehension, how well they understand things. some of the key elements is practice. The kids have to read things practice reading those particular text. And, that's not anything that you would find in a normal classroom, at least in a traditional classroom. So it really requires us to think about, how can we actually create a protocol, if you will, in our classrooms. One of the ones I love is this idea about having a weekly, well, we kind of alluded to it earlier, a weekly performance, say on Fluency Friday. But what happens is early in the week, the students are assigned something that they are going to be practicing or rehearsing throughout the week. So, one way of doing this might be, one example might be, imagine, let's try a middle grade classroom. Melissa, we're going to study great American poets all year long. So say 1 week, we're going to look at the poetry of Emily Dickinson. So every student is assigned a poem by Emily Dickinson. One of the nice things about that is all of her stuff is public domain. You talk about low-hanging fruit. But then, the way we often talk about this is, on Monday, the teacher reads all the material to kids. Reads it out loud. The kids follow along in their own copies. Tuesday, we read it all orally. On Wednesday, the kids get in a small group and they practice, and the teacher goes around, coaches, giving them feedback. Thursday, we do a rehearsal. Quick rehearsal. And then on Friday, we invite the school principal into our classroom, parents, maybe some visitors. They come into class, and as I said, we dim the lights, we pull down the shades, light some candles, and the kids perform there. And then the next week, well, let's look at the poetry by Robert Frost or perhaps Amanda Gorman. Every week could be a different poet. And not only, you're exploring the poet and their poetry, but you're also developing fluency. So it really is, it's more than just fluency itself, and it's done in a very authentic sort of way. All of that takes only about 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes. Much of the rehearsal can be done at home as well. But if we could find a way of actually creating a protocol like that on a weekly basis, and it doesn't have to be poetry. Maybe 1 week we'll do readers' theater scripts. Maybe we'll do songs, or we can combine them. Maybe, around a couple weeks, last week we were commemorating Memorial Day. The Friday performance could have been, some patriotic poetry, but it could also have been as a group singing some patriotic songs, God Bless America, perhaps, or some of those other great patriotic songs that we have. So to me, it's finding that authentic protocol that we can put into play, and don't just save it for Write to Read Week. This has got to be part and parcel of our regular reading instruction. Yeah, and the research it shows that. I've been working with a colleague of mine, Chase Young and David Page, and Chase in particular has been working on developing that routine. And we find that not only do kids improve in terms of their fluency as you'd expect, but comprehension improves as well significantly, especially when you compare kids in classrooms where this kind of instruction is not going on. So the research, we're talking about the science of reading, and the science of reading does support this approach to fluency.
Yeah, we had a teacher who was working with a small group of students, and she was using the same text that they were seeing in their ELA classroom, which was in Wisdom. And this is totally qualitative; it's not research. But the kids said at the end that they felt so much more confident in the ELA class because of the fluency work they were doing in that small group, because they knew it better. They felt so much more confident.
Yeah, and confidence is so much. If you believe in yourself, you're more likely to invest yourself and make sure that you accomplish whatever goals you have. How many of us as adults even do things that we're not very good at? We tend to avoid those. And when kids don't have that confidence in themselves, they find ways of skipping it or getting out of having to do that reading assignment. I'll just get the Cliff Notes version of it or whatever. Do they still have Cliff Notes? I don't know.
I think so.
I think they're Sparks now. Aren't they Sparks Notes now? Spark Notes? I don't know. I haven't used them in a very long time.
Well, is there any new research out there about fluency that we don't know about?
Well, yeah, it's going on all the time. I'll mention a couple, though. The first was, Sharon Vaughn has done some work in this, and she published maybe 2 or 3 years ago. She's not the first author, but she worked with one of her students, and they published a review of research on children identified as learning disabled, LD kids who struggle in reading. And their conclusion was, looking at a number of studies across the board, was that repeated reading and assisted reading is where you read something and you hear it read to you at the same time, as well as some sort of combination, actually produced the positive results in terms of comprehension and fluency among these kids that we worry about. We always knew that, but I mean, here it comes out. Another study came out looking at fluency with older kids, and again, the same sort of results, was that it does lead to improvements in comprehension and fluency, as you would expect. Most recently, though, and I don't know if this is a study or not, but the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's the U.S. Department of Ed. They do this, nation's report card every 4 years, and they tell us we're not doing so well. Anyways, they took the 2018 data, and they had like 2,000. These are fourth graders. And they had them read a passage, and then they measured it on fluency. Now, the fluency was measured in 3 different ways. First was accuracy. And what they found was that accuracy was associated with achievement. Those students who were at the highest level of silent reading comprehension achievement were the best in terms of accuracy. They were 100% accuracy in terms of word recognition. But as you went down in terms of their reading achievement, so did accuracy. But it didn't go down hugely. It went down moderately. The huge differences were with automaticity, reading rate, speed. Those kids who were, again, the highest in terms of reading comprehension, fourth graders, were the most automatic. I hate to say the fastest. They were the most automatic in their word recognition. But again, every time there was a drop in achievement, there was a continuing drop in terms of automaticity as well. But then the third one was expression. One of the things they did was they brought in teachers or experts who listened to these students read, and then they rated them on, I believe it was a 4-point scale. And again, what they found was a quite significant difference in terms of expression. Those students who were the highest achievers read with good expression, good phrasing, and again, with every drop in achievement, there was a drop in terms of expression as well. So all 3 of those combined, accuracy, automaticity, and prosody, were associated with reading achievement. And of course, the outcome of that, the implication is that we need to be paying attention, even with fourth graders. Usually we say by fourth grade, well, we don't need to be worrying too much about word decoding, but we do, especially with our kids who struggle. But even those other areas, automaticity and prosody, when you have a nearly 2,000 students that are participating in the study, the results are pretty reliable. So again, we're just verifying what we intuitively know, what our previous research has done, but we need to continue to talk about this sort of issue and validate it for ourselves. This is important. So studies are coming out. Actually, if I could, I'll talk about a study I'm going to be engaging in this fall.
Absolutely.
Most people who know about fluency know about the fluency norms. Jen Hasbrook and Jerry Tyndall created norms. They go from first grade through 8th grade. And, like you, Melissa, what about 9th grade and 10th grade, 11th grade and 12th grade?
We've just looked at the 8th grade.
What happened?
Right,
yeah,
they're not there.
We just looked at 8th grade.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, what is the optimal rate of fluency to be a really good reader? And who are really good readers? We're going to define them as college graduates. So what we're going to do is we're going to find college graduates. And of course, if you work in a school, you're surrounded by college graduates, your colleagues, and ask them to read a passage for us, of maybe a couple passages or whatever. And, if we can get 200, 300 people reading for us, we get a pretty good idea of what that reading rate is for a college graduate. Now, my guess is probably, 160 to 180 words correct per minute, somewhere in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But the consequence of that is not just what we know would be a ceiling. Once you get up to this level, you don't need to go beyond it. But it also provides us with a way of filling in the gaps. If we know what the 8th grade norm is and we know what the college graduate norm is, we can we interpolate, make a pretty good guess of what should those in between levels should be. So hopefully this might give us some indication for you guys, you colleagues working in the secondary level of what we should be aiming for in terms of those norms. So
yeah, that's amazing.
That's my plan for the fall.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
Yeah. I might be calling you guys up to read for me.
We can read for you. We owe you one.
Anytime.
So. Okay. Well, I'll count on it. In fact, if anybody's listening to this podcast, if you're interested, come September or so, drop me a line and we can get on Zoom. I figure we can do most of this kind of research either in person or via Zoom, like we're doing right now. Yeah.
I'll put everything in the show notes and information and links and stuff. So I'll be able to contact you.
That'd be fun.
We can recruit for you.
Yeah. I feel like though, I mean, to just like stamp it and underscore this, like I shared with you, I have a daughter and shared a little story about her earlier, but she is just finishing 3rd grade. Mm-hmm. And, I recently did the Foundation's intervention placement assessment with her just to be like, hey, I need to just double check because make sure you're all good as you head forward into 4th grade. No, like 0 intervention, she with flying colors passed that entire assessment, which would then have told me where she would have had deficits within any foundational skills. And then I listened to her read, and if it's not all as it's usually fairly accurate, but the automaticity and the expression needs some work. Yeah. And the one thing that has shown marked improvement has been the small chunks of the grade level text about content that she's reading about in her core classes. Mm-hmm. And that has been, such a confidence builder for her because then she's learning vocabulary and she's able to use the vocabulary, and it's usually repeated vocabulary. And I know there's, some morphology that comes into play in these pieces. So I just wanted to like stamp that with just like a little personal story to be like, listen, even that 4th grade, and we know that like 4th grade on, they're supposed to be able to do this, but I'm sitting here saying my kid's a quote good reader, and if I were not like a literacy person, I would have no clue, right? And so parents who are listening, if you're a parent, like listen to your kid read, like ask them to read aloud to you.
Yeah, no, you're right. As most parents would say, as long as my kid is reading the words correctly and knows what most of them mean, I'm happy. And you should be, of course, but that's not enough. The goal of phonics instruction is to get students not to use it. What I'd like to know, we should interview your daughter is in 3rd grade. She finished 3rd grade?
Not yet. There's still a few more weeks, unfortunately, over here, but yeah, soon. Yeah.
How much time was actually spent talking about those kinds of things, reading with expression, reading in chunks and phrases?
Well, I mean, I can answer that because we've been on virtual all year.
Okay. That makes
not
it
really,
hard.
but not a lot. So I've done a lot of that with her.
Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned the phrasing. That is a good indication of fluency. I forget who said this, but a quote I use often is the natural unit of reading is not the word, it's the phrase, the noun phrase, the verb phrase, the prepositional phrase. What does a word like if mean or of, OF? By themselves, they're limited. So they've got to be part of a phrase.
For sure.
Well, about 20 years ago, I met one of my old heroes. He's now passed away, Edward Fry, Dr. Ed Fry. He's the guy who came up with the sight words, or he calls them instant words. Mm-hmm. And I said, Dr. Fry, or I guess that's what I called him back then. It's great. And teachers do a great job. What they do is they put your instant words, high frequency words on a word wall, and the kids practice them and learn to say. How about if we teach them as phrases? In the water, by the car, my mom and dad, teach them that way. And he said, that's a great idea. And so we actually worked together, collaborated on a program. Actually, on my website, I have a collection of all 600 of Ed Fry's high frequency words written in the context of phrases. And I know teachers who find this, use them, oftentimes will get a hold of me and say, this is really cool because not only are you teaching the high frequency words to students, but you're teaching them as a chunk, as a phrase. Mm-hmm. So they're not doing, in my house, it's in my house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We the people. So they're actually getting a twofer. They're learning the high frequency words. They're developing that sense of phrasing that, is really so important for all of us. Even when we speak, we don't speak in word by word. We speak except our, that robot speech. But
that's so funny because I've given a lot of those 1 minute oral reading assessments this year. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when the students aren't using, reading in those phrases, like I have a hard time following, even like if it's the 20th time I've heard this passage and I'm like, wait, where are you?
Well, especially if it's a monotone also, because it's just
can you imagine how they're feeling reading it if I'm having trouble following along and I've heard the passage several times already?
Yeah.
That's a good point, Melissa.
Reading is so much more complex, than just reading the words.
Yeah.
There's a lot of subtlety to it.
Yeah. I want to go back to what I mentioned a moment ago, but we didn't really touch on. I mentioned morphology, and I know that you have some little secrets you want to share not secrets because you post them on Twitter all the time, but can you tell us about morphology as a way to build vocabulary? Because I love listening to you talk about this.
Well, as I think I've mentioned in our earlier conversation, it went back to me in high school, taking a course in Latin for 4 years. And although I never got terribly good at it, what it actually did for me was it improved my English vocabulary. Because what we know is that upwards of 90% of our multisyllabic words are longer words. Those words that your kids, Melissa, engage in, or 90% of those words are derived from Latin and Greek roots. Yet, for a long time, I really didn't. Although I knew there's something to this, I didn't really have the background or the expertise to do anything. It wasn't until I met a colleague of mine here at Kent State. His name's Rick Newton, and his wife Evangeline. They're experts in this. Rick is the chair of the classics department at Kent State, and so we just started collaborating on this. And the point I simply want to make is that it's a great way of building vocabulary, and the research is beginning to support it. Nell Duke, in a Edutopia blog a couple of years ago, she said she identified 3 literacy practices that actually work. Number 1 is morphology. Now, first of all, I probably should define what morphology is. It's basically they're meaningful parts within words. We often talk about word families like ACK and ING. If you know those, you can figure out words like back, tack, sack, sing, sting, swing, and so on. Well, this is even better because if you know some of these morphemes, like BI, used as a prefix, not only can it help you with the pronunciation, but it can more importantly help you with the meaning. It refers to 2. So words like biplane, bifocals, biannual, biceps, bicuspids, and so on and so forth. So you're teaching one morpheme, one root. You can learn 10, 20, 30, in some cases, over 100 English words there. And then so what I've been doing for the past year since the pandemic has been going on is I do something on Monday. I call it Morphology Monday. I try to identify a root that is seasonal. And I create a little resource for teachers that can download. You can find it on Twitter. So, for example, last week was Memorial Day. The root was mem, which means mindful. Of course, you see that in words like Memorial Day, but words like memory, memento, memorandum, memo, many words are that. Around Earth Day, I put up Terra, Terra, which is Latin for earth. And we have words like subterranean, extraterrestrial, Mediterranean, terrace, terrain, territory, terrarium, and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So it's, the idea is simply that, you teach one root, you can learn a lot of words there. And as I mentioned earlier, the research is out there. There's a study, not Nell Duke endorsement, which is always good, but there was a review study in the Review of Educational Research a few years ago, and they found that this approach to teaching vocabulary is very productive for building vocabulary comprehension, but not just for, we often think of this for older kids. Even elementary kids benefit from this, and even especially kids who struggle again. We're tapping into what I think is this natural, natural I don't know if this is the right word or not, proclivity we have to see patterns. We have, this seems to be something that is innate to human beings, to see patterns in their environment. And what we're doing is just allowing, helping kids see those patterns beyond just the word families, but the morphemes as well.
And they get excited about it. I mean, I think I know at least like reading different things with my daughter, like she learned phytoplankton in the beginning of the year and learned in context of a text. And then she saw another word with that same phyto beginning. I don't remember what word it was, but it was, and she was so excited. She's like, oh, she made a great guess of what the word might be based on that. But kids get excited because it's something that's familiar, and they feel proud that they can do big things or read big words.
It gives them a strategy. Yeah. My colleague in Virginia, Hillary Loftus, so we already chatted. You're unrelated to her, but she does that. She's a middle school reading specialist, and she uses the word toehold. She says it gives kids a toehold onto words they might not normally know, but just like your daughter there.
Yeah.
If you know that a word starts with bi as a prefix, think two. It at least gets you started, and you combine that with the context, you probably figure out the word. We know that democracy, government of the people, right? DEM, D-E-M means people. Okay. Now let's switch that over to the word pandemic. Okay. Pan means all or everything. Dem means people. Well, we're seeing that happen right in our eyes. Pandemic. All the people, or a good number of them, are going to get sick, and we're all of us at risk for being sick there. And then, of course, that turns into demographics, the study of people, and on and on and on and on. But it's been estimated that upwards of 90% of our academic vocabulary is drawn from Latin and Greek roots. So, if you want to not only improve reading, but also improve social studies, science, mathematics, this is a great way of doing it. So the kids can tap into some of those, hard, more challenging words that they encounter in those academic words. If you know that poly means many, then polygon, many angles, and so on and so forth. I get started on this and I don't want to stop.
I'm wondering if you have any, I don't know, studies or information around teaching morphology in context. Does that matter? I always felt like personally, when I learned it in context, I could remember it better.
Right, exactly.
Which I think makes a lot of sense, but I just want to hear you talk about it.
I think, and that's why when I've been doing this Morphology Monday, I've been trying to create the context. The context is the time of year.
Yeah. So
Earth Day, let's work on Terra. Memorial Day, and so on and so forth. But you're right. I think that's the way to do it. You're reading something in context. You come across a word. Of course, you could do a little, teachable moment on that. But let's expand that teachable moment and help kids see all these other words that are derived from that. But teaching them only in isolation is not as productive as bringing into authentic reading with our kids.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I just want to put a stamp on what you said of this is for our youngest kids, even, our K1, 2. And even, I was looking at Nell Duke's article, and it's for specifically early elementary learners.
Yeah.
Just because I often hear we'll get to that after they master the phonics and decoding, right? Like
fourth grade, fifth grade.
This is first, then we'll get there.
Yeah. I have a colleague that is in your neck of the woods. One of the DC suburbs in Virginia, Fairfax County, I think. Her name is Joanne Newton, and I think she's a reading specialist now, but she works with primary grade teachers, and they bring this in their primary grades, and it's pretty amazing. They use a lot of the prefixes, all the words that have sub in them, all the words that have, PRI, meaning before, and so on and so forth. And they focus on one per week. And the kids not only are seeing the words in isolation, but they're also reading passages that contain those. I've got an interesting study, not study, but a little story I'd like to share with you.
Yeah.
It actually combines fluency, usually around November, late October. I work with kids, and we anticipate Veterans Day. So what we do is we teach kids the songs of the military services, and we either bring in some veterans or we go to the local VFW hall and do a little salute to veterans. Well, it turns out, let's see, we are also working on the numerical prefixes. UNI means 1, BI means 2, TRI means 3, and so on. Well, it turns out, and we tell kids, when you ever see these in your reading, point them out to us. So we just happened to, we were singing the Marine song, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And the kids had the text in front of them. Well, this was a second or third grader. He raised his hand, Mr. Rasinski, there's a try in that in Tripoli. What does it have to do with 3?
That's funny.
It's just a city in Libya. And I should have taken it up on his question. I just kind of dismissed him because he went home, talked to his parents, and he said, well, let's explore this. And they did. Tripoli, Libya is actually made up of 2 roots, tri and P-O-L-I. More commonly, it's P-O-L-I-S, polis, which means city, like Indianapolis, Minneapolis, Metropolis, Annapolis. So
I hadn't even made that connection.
Yeah. City of Ann. But so Tripoli was originally three towns that combined to make one city called Tripoli.
Oh, that's so funny.
This kid comes back and he yells at me. He's like, wrong. It does have something to do with that's what we were saying, how it becomes a vehicle, a strategy that the kids can use. And it doesn't work all the time, but gosh, it works enough times that it makes it certainly worthwhile.
Well, and that little guy was so curious. Like, that's what I think. Yeah. It prompts the curiosity, and it helps to forge the curiosity. Exactly. to transfer the knowledge from one to another.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're like cracking the code somehow, right? Like
right. And it's not just the sound code, it's the meaning code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so fun. When
we know that so many of our words in English are derived from Latin and Greek, it just makes sense to at least spend a few minutes every day devoted to that.
Yeah. So far we've booked teachers for about 20 minutes a day between fluency and morphology.
Okay.
That's a good thing. It's a good thing.
That'd be a great thing. I wouldn't object to it.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to put a lot of time into fluency, 20 minutes per day, maybe 5 to 10 minutes on the morphology. It can take most of our time should be devoted to real reading, but certainly time devoted to this. But again, here's the thing with the morphology. Most teachers, including myself until I start working with my colleague, we don't have the background in this. We need to educate ourselves and develop our knowledge of this so that we can actually begin to apply it in our classrooms. We don't have to be PhDs in morphology, but we do need to understand, the connection between morphemes and English vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. I think you did a great job with a little intro session for any teachers or leaders listening. Like you hit the point home with some solid examples, I think.
Examples always work, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we running out of time here?
I know. Do you have a moment to talk about the thing that I don't want to put you over, but to talk about what you're working on now? Or are you running to another meeting?
No, I'm not running to another meeting. Well, I told you what I'm going to do this fall. I kind of switch between teaching, research, and curriculum material development. Actually, one of the things I'm working on right now is with a poet. David Harrison is a highly regarded poet. He's won awards all over the country. He's from Missouri. Somehow we met and hit it off together. We're working along with Mary Jo Fresh from Ohio State, another colleague. We're creating a program. It's actually not a program itself. It's more just a supplemental material, but it's called Partner Poems. So what David is doing is he's writing poetry and they're built around word families. So this is kind of a phonics thing. And they're meant to be read by 2 or 3 people. So it's a great way of getting kids to collaborate with one another, or a teacher working individually with a child. Then Mary Jo is writing some instructional material that goes with it. And what I'm doing is I'm doing the word ladders. We haven't had a chance to talk about the word ladders.
Oh, I know. I was hoping you'd bring them up.
I'm developing 2 word ladders there. Now, I'm sure that many of the people listening to this probably know about word ladders, but if I can give you a 1-minute thing, a word ladder, first of all, I need to give a shout out to Isabel Beck and Pat Cunningham, because they've been doing this for years. What I did was I do what all good teachers do. You take somebody else's idea and you run with it. You tweak it. A word ladder is simply a little activity where kids go create a series of words, one word after the next. Each word requires a 1 or 2 letter change in the previous word. So, for example, if I said, let's start with the word hot. Okay, change 1 letter in hot to make a word that is something you wear on your head. That would be a hat. Change a letter in hat to make an animal that purrs, cat, and so on. So you see how it's done there. Now, the little tweak that I did is when I created these word ladders, the first word and the last word go together in some way. So it's a bit of a game.
Okay.
So like dog to cat, dark to light, and things like that there. So it's a little game, but actually, if you take a close look at it, in fact, Isabel Beck published a study of this with her colleagues in Scientific Studies in Reading, found that first graders, struggling first graders who did this on a regular basis, and it's a little 5-minute activity, 10-minute activity, demonstrated significantly greater improvement in phonemic awareness, spelling, phonics, and comprehension. Even comprehension improved when compared with students who were in an alternative intervention. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
But if you think about it, what kids are doing is when you're doing this, 1 word after next, you have to, first of all, you got to think of the clue. So that's vocabulary. You got to think of, where does the sound change when I go from hat to cat? And then what letter represents that? What you're doing is what some people have called more orthographic mapping. Mm-hmm. You really have to dig into the word itself. It's not just simply, looking at the word and memorizing it. You're actually analyzing the word, but you're doing it in a fun, engaging way. I've heard from so many teachers around the country who have used this on a regular basis. And again, it's more an observational comment than actual research. But with so many are saying how much kids enjoy doing it, but also seeing the improvement in spelling and vocabulary and word recognition. I often point out to teachers about games. Think of all the games that we play as adults. And how many of the games are word games? Scrabble, Boggle,
all of them, I think.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I love word games.
Well, if you like to play word games, why
even like crazy adult, like naughty adult games, if you will, are grounded in, what's Cards Against Humanity, Funny Ones, they're all grounded in wordplay.
Yeah. And the point is, if we like to do that, why wouldn't kids?
Yeah.
And yet what often happens in school is the games are only reserved when the work's done. I think we should try to create a curriculum, word study curriculum, where it has a game-like feel to it. And certainly, something like this, people have actually compared these word ladders to crossword puzzles for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have many of the similar features of that for kids. So they're a lot of fun. And even if kids did nothing else and have fun, it'd be worth it. But here's the thing. Do you ever notice that? Do you guys play Words with Friends?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been off of it for a while, but it's Scrabble on your phone.
Yeah.
If you play it regularly, one of the things that Words with Friends does is it tracks your score. And I've done this with several people who are kind of do it all the time. Their score goes up all the time. And you'd expect it, but I have to say we have a special name for it when your score goes up. It's called learning, right? When you get better at something. Why not do this in school? You do it on a regular basis. Kids are going to get better at it, and that's learning.
That's so true.
The kind of learning I want kids to have. That it's engaging and fun and productive all at the same time.
For sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's what I call the art of teaching. That's the challenge. Yeah.
Yes.
Not just the science, but the art.
Well, before we leave, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, is there anything else that you want to tell us about Fluency or anything else that we just haven't mentioned today? Or this could be your piece of advice that you leave for our audience.
Well, just that it's important. I hope that, I made got you interested if you're not interested in Fluency. And now would be a good time. I don't know when you guys are going to actually post this, but I hopefully early in the next week or so. But we're going into the summer months. This would be a great time for teachers to engage in some learning, learn more about morphology, learn more about reading fluency. And if I can plug myself, I have a website.
Please do.
TimRasinski.com. There. If you look under resources, I have a lot of the articles that I've written. I just haven't posted there, so they can be downloaded for free. So that's an easy way of getting material that's not going to cost you anything, and the articles are relatively short. If I have one talent, I seem to be able to write in a relatively easy, understandable way. So that would be one thing. Use the summer to learn, and also to be creative. If we talk about developing fluency, and if anybody out there says, yeah, I'd like to try this thing where we do a weekly readers theater script, or we do a readers weekly poetry slam, well, then start collecting poetry this summer, right? And start perhaps writing your own, put them all together so that you might have once a week or once every 2 weeks, you could have something where your students would take a poem and rehearse it. You can't do this if on a Sunday night you say, oh, every one of my kids is going to have a poem tomorrow to rehearse.
Yeah.
That's a little bit too late. Or think about writing scripts for Readers Theater. I love writing Readers Theater scripts. One of the easiest things to do is to take a story, and recast it as a script. So when students may perhaps read a story, one of my favorite examples is The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch. We actually had students do this one. They read the story, but then when they read the story, they turned it into a script. They added dialogue and narration to the script, and then they rehearsed it. I would argue that when you do things like that, you're engaging in an activity. It's very authentic. There's script writers in Hollywood that make a lot more money than us. But also you have to understand the original text. If I'm taking the introduction to Hatchet by, oh gosh, who just wrote that? I forgot. Gary
Paulson.
Yeah. That part where the plane crashes. If I turn that into a script, I have to have a deep understanding of the original story to begin with. Mm-hmm. Or if I had to write my own version of a poem that's based upon, or write a poem that's a reflection of a story I've read. Again, it requires deep understanding. It's more than just, fluency, more than just writing.
Yeah.
That's involved there. So use the time in the summer to do some of that stuff.
I'm thinking of so many examples and like connecting to it. And just because Wit and Wisdom is like my bag, but like in fourth grade, kids do read that text by Gary Paulson. And so I'm thinking like, wow, that would be a great extension activity. Like I can just see them poring over that or the teacher creating that, or seventh grade students write a poem about identity after they read a poem about identity. And what a great way to help them in the very beginning of the year, get into an identity is a concept that takes them all throughout the year. So not only is it helping them to stamp the poem that they just wrote and get that fluency, but also to really understand this concept, this very vague concept of identity that they're going to solidify throughout the year. So you're just making me think a lot about like how to attach it to what they're already doing, or, if they don't have materials that are of quality, then they're going to pull things in to do just that, like connect it like you just shared. And I think it's just so meaningful for whoever's listening, whatever space they're in, whether they have, great materials or maybe are heading and hoping to get great materials, or just have your website, right? They have access to stuff. Right. That's good stuff.
And I'll also, if you like, you can throw my email address into the program notes. I do have the script by Gary Paulson based upon, So if anybody wants it, send me.
That's so cool.
I've got Sojourner Truth Speech, Ain't I a Woman? I wrote this with some kids. as a script. And of course, that's perfect for Women's History Month or African American History Month. I've got, I did a lot with speeches where the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
And turn that into a little script. And the scripts don't have to be terribly long. They're usually just 2 or 3 pages. But what you're doing is you're learning essential content and developing all these other cross-curricular skills as well, competencies as well.
Yeah.
So,
Melissa, remind me, is it when people go on, Melissa and I just realized this, where can you not click on the links? Is it in the app or is it on the website?
It's on the Apple website on a computer.
You can't click on links on the app. On the app, you can, right?
On the app, you can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're listening and you're using Apple on your computer,
go to the app on your phone.
Go to the app to get the
and you'll get
links.
all the links.
We just discovered this.
I just give it to you.
I know. No, I mean, we'll hyperlink them in, but it's just so interesting because Melissa was like, I thought we were hyperlinking everything in, but it's on my phone, but it's not on my computer. So then I was thinking, well, gosh, we should say something on the podcast because if people are trying to get, we look like we're lying, but we really are linking it.
Well, can I do this real quickly then? My email address is T as in Timothy, and then my last name, Rasinski, without the I, okay, TRASINSK @kent.edu, Kent State. My Twitter is @TimRasinski1. Okay, that's easy enough. And then the website is timrasinski.com. So there you go.
Perfect. So now if we're linked or not, you've got it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was such a treat getting to talk to you, and thank you for all of the work that you continue to do.
It's been delightful. Thanks for inviting me, Lori and Melissa. It's really been fun. I enjoyed it.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Look forward to it.
Sounds good.